Hi, everybody. This is Hondo Carpenter, your Sports Illustrated beat writer covering the Las Vegas Raiders and the host of the Las Vegas Raiders Insider Podcast with a very special broadcast today. So many of you emailed in and said to me, Hondo, that's great. Coach Walsh is teaching football, but can we get a segment with memories of Al and Raider memories? And let me tell you, this guy has got him. He is a walking verbal encyclopedia of Raider knowledge. And we welcome him in, the one and only, the great Coach Tom Walsh. Coach, how are you, my friend?
Good morning, Hondo. You doing all right?
I'm doing great, sir. All right, I've got to dig in because fans want to hear from you. There is a generation of people who grew up when Al took over the Raiders. Then there's a new set of generation of fans who don't ever remember Al Davis at all. So the older group wants the memories, the younger group wants to be educated. So I got some Al Davis questions for you. First of all, what was the one prevailing thing if you were asked to describe Al? You worked for him, but he was a friend also. What would you say was the one prevailing thing about him?
I think the most dominant aspect of his personality was that his knowledge on so many different subjects was so vast. He could talk politics, talk religion, talk English literature, talk football. I mean, he could talk baseball. It didn't matter the subject. He was very well read, very educated, totally aware of more than just people just thought he was like a football guy and had blinders on for football only. No, not at all.
Hmm. What is the biggest thing you learned from him as a coach?
You know, the idea that you could take players, have a vision for them, allow them to develop and to cultivate their skill sets, and give them time. There's such a rush to judgment, and even in today's league, is so different. Uh, Nowadays, they want to reduce the number of preseason games, which hurts the development of younger players. The league nowadays is so focused on, I say the league, I mean the league office, 345 Park Avenue, is so focused on revenue and generating new revenue streams. And Goodell's wants to take from $13+ billion a year. Within the next few years, he wants to take it to 25 or $27 billion. And Lester Hayes used to always get, yeah, it's always about the deceased presidents. It's about the Benjamins. It's about the Jeffersons. And today, that focus, that myopic vision that the league has, in my regard, is how I see it, is hurting the development of the game. You want to add an 18th game, you want to have more revenue. You want to take away another preseason game and go down to 2. Well, what about all the young kids, the drafted players, the free agents you signed? Where are they going to play? How are you going to develop them? How are you going to be able to evaluate them? Because you're not going to have the preseason games to get them ready to put them on the field to see how they participate. And back in the day, back in the early 80s, heck, we would go to camp 125, 103 players. And you had time to work with them. You had went from 6 preseason games to 4 preseason games, but you worked twice a day, full pads, 7 days a week. We would temper the intensity of the workouts and everything. But, we go to camp, we'd have 5 quarterbacks, we'd have 14, 16 wide receivers, 18, 20 offensive linemen. And so you got the repetitions, you got a chance to allow players to develop. And nowadays, I don't see it.
Fascinating. When you looked at Al Davis, what was something about him that maybe the public didn't notice, but guys like you that rub shoulders with him every day did?
Al did not publicize a lot of things. He'd like to keep things privately, but he provided so much charitable contributions, so much behind the scenes financial assistance, not only to players, as well as coaches, to scouts, to families. I remember one of our former coaches Al charged the plane. The guy had a brain tumor, flew him off to Minnesota to the Mayo Clinic and put him on the plane. Wrote the check. We had people in the organization passing away. Al paid for funerals, took care of everything. There were some tragedies, and I remember years ago, a player's wife had been killed with a car accident where a guy drove up on a sidewalk in San Francisco. Al took care of all the expenses, brought in a nanny, established college scholarships for the kids right off the bat. They're just infants and small children. And he told the player, hey, whatever it takes, we'll get it done. And no one said a word. And things like that. Never made the meeting, never made the paper, but his generosity was phenomenal.
That's fascinating to me. So I have to ask you, because you worked for him, I was told once that everyone saw Al as they just chucked the ball deep and beat people up time to coach. And someone said to me, only people who didn't know Al saw that. He was married to winning. He wasn't married to a system. They said toughness was his system. I mean, was his part of winning. But they said he wouldn't have cared if you ran the ball 80 times or threw it 80. He just wanted to win. Is that a true statement about Al Davis?
He obviously winning was everything to him. But he would provide the personnel, and he would come up and say, if you need somebody, let me know. I'll see if I can get him. If I can, we'll get him. If not, we'll have to go on. We'll look for somebody else. So he was open to that. But once he brought players in with an intent and with a vision and with a focus in mind, our job was to develop them after evaluating them and to utilize them to the best of their abilities to help us win. And if it was a Marcus Allen, a Bo Jackson, a Roger Craig, or it could have been a James Lofton or Willie Gault or James Jett or Timmy Brown, well, you created packages for those individuals to feature them. And a lot of it also is dictated by, your opponent and some of the vulnerabilities which they may have had to the players who we could feature in certain games.
Right. I was told that Al was a huge film watcher before it was even popular. And I was told one of the things that he really admired about you was your commitment to watch film. Did you ever watch it with him? And what was it about you and him and the synergy of watching film?
Well, it all goes back to Sid Gilman. Okay, let's be honest. Sid was probably the premier coach back in the 50s who started the film. And, Sid came from a family that his father had movie theaters, and Sid would be watching the film, and you saw how newsreels were created so that when you went to the theater to watch a movie, they would show you, besides the cartoons that would show earlier, they used to have newsreels that they spliced together highlights from news segments onto the film and sprockets and everything. So Sid got the idea. I can take our film that we shoot from practices and games and splice it and put together training reels and, teach, augment what's being done in the classroom and on the field with video. And of course, Al started coaching for Sid at the AFL with the LA Chargers in 1960. And he coached the wide receivers, the Lance Allworth and all those guys. And then, and Sid was basically the video guy. And we would have, even when I was working with Sid at this passing camp back in the early 70s, University of San Diego, Sid would go into the room in the dorm where we were staying, and he had a stack of cans, 3 or 4 feet high on the floor of 400-foot spools of cut-ups spliced together for every pass pattern, for every run. And, he always had a phrase that we've used in Latin called sine qua non, which means, roughly translated, without which there's nothing. And so every play offensively, whether it's a run or a pass, had a sine qua non. And Bill Walsh later adopted that same philosophy when he was the head coach of the Niners. And but there was always one aspect about which was required in Sid's mind for that play to be successful. I mean, we'd run what was in the old days 68, 69 boom, which is like a blunt run weak play to the fullback in a two-back set, or nowadays you run it in a one-back set with 12 personnel or whatever. Same concept, zone blocking scheme and reverse three-quarter pivot by the quarterback. And like the sine qua non for him was about how the job of the quarterback was to be able to seat the ball in the belly of the fullback so the fullback's eyes would never have to drop to be able to see the handoff. He'd take it by feel, and that way he could read where the cut was going to be. And but every play had a sine qua non, and so Al was big on that. And we would watch tape all the time, and we'd look at offense, we'd look at defense, look at special teams. I remember one time we spent an hour just talking about the nose tackle between Al and me, and I had the same tape. We're on the phone, and we're watching this thing, and he's talking about should the nose tackle, the nose guard, play across the face of the center on the cutoff block, or should he play the backside neck of the nose of the center on the cutoff block and squeeze it that way? Do I play cross face or do I play back shoulder, back neck? And we talked about it for over an hour, watching the clips back and forth. And after the end of the conversation, after he goes, well, what do you think? I said, I think we play with the backside neck of the nose. He goes, I agree. And that's what I did. And so we were talking an hour on a nose tackle in a 3-4 defense about how you play the cutoff block of the center. If he goes to reach you, do I cross face or do I play the backside and squeeze it and compress him into the hole?
All right, I got 2 more questions, but I did some digging on you. That's where these questions are coming from today, and about you and Al's relationship. So I was told, and privately I'll tell you who I talked to, but I was told that one of the things that frustrated Al was coaches who couldn't see what a player could be. And he used to tell people, I want guys that can look at a chunk of ice and tell me what a sculptor could make out of it. And so that was one thing he liked about you. And I was told that there was a story about a defender on your team that even though you were an offensive coach, I don't know if it was in camp or what, you really talked him up to Al, and he ended up really becoming a star, and the defensive coaches never saw it. You saw it first as an offensive coach. I'm curious, take fans inside your relationship with Al and how the two of you viewed and saw talent.
Well, I think, I'll be honest, I think we had a special relationship primarily because of Sid. Sid was like my football father, okay? And he took Al off the street. Joe Madro, who was a longtime scout and Sid's offensive line coach going back to the University of Cincinnati back in the 50s, had heard Al speak at a clinic back in New York back in the late 50s. And he gets Sid on the phone and says, hey, and just as Joe Madro, and Joe was with us for 1,000 years at the Raiders too, he says, we got to have this guy. This guy's got to be on our staff. And so, hey, that's how we got hired. But, we just, we clicked in that regard. I tell you, this is so bizarre. I was like 32. I flew out to Oakland for the interview, and I'm meeting with Al over on Edgewater, and he kind of forgot that I was born and raised less than 17 miles on the other side of the Calicut Tunnel from Oakland. Okay, my grandfather ran the SP Railroad from Oakland all the way through Byron and Brentwood and everything, and so I mean, I remember when it was the Oakland Seniors, not the Oakland Raiders. And that's
whoa, wait. They've not always been the Raiders. They were the Seniors.
They were the Oakland Seniors. Swear to God, that's a story in itself. That's something. But anyway, so we're sitting at the desk, just the two of us, and he's sitting at the desk, and I don't know. I guess I always spoke unhinged, uncensored, and kind of like this, I said what I thought, and I meant what I said, and I said what I meant. So we're talking one day, and he's sitting across from me, and he's talking about the greatness of the Raiders and all the championships and all this and all that. I said, well, geez, I honestly, I always thought you should have won more games. You should have won more champions. You should have won more titles. And it was like a jaw dropping moment. You talk about where he just looked at me like this. Oh my God, this kid's talking to me, Al Davis, and this is what he's saying. And the guy's like, a kid. But so we could kind of. It's like we would have a conversation, and even in meetings, I always say, now, what I have to say may not be something with which you agree. He goes, I know. That's why I'm asking you. He says, I'm not looking for a yes man. He says, I want to know what you think. And he says, I may not agree with it, but he says, I know you're going to tell me what you think. You've researched it, you've studied it, whatever. And so we always had that ability to communicate. And, that was a unique ability about it. I remember years ago, I'm the offensive coordinator. We're hiring a new head coach. He calls me over to the office on the other side of the facility in El Segundo, and he says, you're going to get on the plane. I want you to go to this place in Texas where there's this Texas State Coaches Convention. There's a guy I want you to interview for our head coaching position. He says, now, you know this offense, you know the defense, you know the organization. There's nothing about this that you don't know. He says, I'm sending you down there. If this guy can fit with us and what we do, you're going to be able to make the determination. And then we finished the conversation. He says, I don't care if it's 2 a.m. in the morning. You call me on the phone. You tell me this is the guy we should hire, or should we look for somebody else? And I looked at it. He goes, yeah. He says, you're going. I said, fine, I'll go. And then Beverly hands the ticket. She says, it's all set. Bam, they got a vehicle waiting out front to take you to the airport. You're gone. And so, but that's the kind of,
Wait. Did they hire the coach?
He was offered the job and then didn't take it, then said he'd take it, then he didn't take it. So it went back and forth. But yeah, it was, and it was a strange situation. But and the bizarre thing is, like, I go to get in the car, and I get a USA Today Sports page, and I flip it going through the colored fish wrap, and page 2, there's already an article in there about me getting on a plane to go interview the head coach, a guy for the head coaching. When does an offensive coordinator go interview the candidate? And then I go into the interview in the coach's room that night after he'd spoken, and the first question, it's not me interviewing him. His first question, he says, let me ask you something. Is it true that you have a lifetime contract with the Raiders? And I'm looking at this guy like, what are you talking about? But we talked for 3 hours about everything: offense, defense, personnel, all that kind of stuff.
Who was the guy?
It was unique. It was different.
Who's the guy, Coach?
I'm not going to say who the guy was.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. So this takes me
Say
to
your
the
white
last thing
lightning.
I heard.
Are you having some white lightning this morning? What's it? It's a mayonnaise jar. You drinking out of that?
No, I drink out of mason jars, and it's just water.
Okay. I got to check. It could be white lightning. You never know.
Okay. Coach, one of the things that I heard, I've learned about Al, is he despised yes people. He didn't respect them. He didn't like them. I'm not going to use the terms that I've heard him, that I was told he used, but he didn't like them. And I was told, so this is the question I said to someone: why do you think the Coach Walsh and Coach Davis relationship worked? And this is what the person told me. And again, I'm going to tell you who I talked to off air. Because they don't want it. They didn't want this public. But they said this to me. They said, quote, Coach Walsh understood who the boss was. Everybody understood Al was the boss. Some people spoke up because they were assholes and they wanted to resist authority. Some people spoke up because they loved the Raiders and respected them and didn't want them to make a mistake. Al didn't like people who just spoke up because they were assholes. Al liked people who spoke up because they loved the Raiders and didn't worry about offending him, because they knew that he knew their heart was for the silver and black. That was Tom. That's a pretty good compliment. Could you talk about that part of your relationship?
Okay. I look at today's club and I look at how we used to approach things. And, to me, the important thing is for players to understand that organization, the foundation which Al laid back in '63, and we would always start off. You've got a mini camp coming up next week, a mandatory mini camp. All veterans and rookies, free agents, they're all there. Okay. The first thing we would do, walk in. Al Locasal was great. Would have a video presentation of the Raiders. I tell you, you go watch the Autumn Wind narrated by John Facenda. Now, you want to talk about, we're the only team in the NFL that has its own video, its own theme song, the Autumn Wind. Brings tears to your eyes. I know all those guys in that video. I look back and I've known them all since I was knee high to a fire hydrant. And there is something about that organization. See, to me, it's about history. It's about loyalty, and it's just there's a passion and a commitment, to the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And I see these kids, these young guys today need to understand what this organization was years ago. We just had last year, our 40th anniversary, January 22nd, 1984, 40 years ago, this last January was the last Super Bowl the Raiders won. In between, there's been a lot of whatever, people can go research records and everything, a lot of issues that have gone on, but you got to show them the highlights. You got to let them understand the history of the organization. And then the ironic thing about it is also the passion to play and for why they're playing today is different than it was back then. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, I remember in a big huddle after practice one day, the whole team's around saying, "Why are you playing the game?" We had one player in the whole group who said he wanted to win a Super Bowl. Players, "Why? It's going to provide a good living for me and my family. It's going to do this, it's going to do that." One guy in the whole group talked about winning the Super Bowl. I had players who come to me, "You're making $425,000 a week in a game check. Season's over. You're in the playoffs." Well, your paydays have stopped. You now have a legislative value of dollars that you're paid for each playoff game, whether it's a wild card, first round, second round, whatever. The guy goes, "Oh my God, the pay cut we're taking to go to the playoffs." I'm like, and see, that's the thing. The pay cut. I said, wait a minute. You're playing for the Super Bowl. You're playing for a championship, a chance to have that ring on your finger. And they were concerned that they were taking a pay cut to play. And see, the salaries are so big now. My concern is, how hungry are you as a player or a coach to win the Super Bowl, as opposed to, "Oh, my salary's this. I got an agent blowing hot air at my butt telling me how great I am, and he's talking about my next contract and free agency and all that kind of stuff." And I think, to me, the gravity of that situation has really transitioned throughout the league, where loyalty no longer is a dominating thing. Free agency has created, musical chairs on rosters. You get 17 to 18 players a year with new franchises. And but I think if I were running the show, I'd be showing all those old vintage highlights of the organization and then show the highlights from the previous year and let them understand it. I want them, when they walk in that building, we're playing the Autumn Wind. That song is going to dominate. They're going to understand from day one what it means to be in that organization. And that is something, I don't know if it's there. Back in 06, 07, I had an individual tell me, these guys, they don't want to hear about the history of the Raiders. They don't want to hear about all the old stories, the great players in the Hall of Famers. They just they're concerned about themselves now. But see, I don't see it that way. History, when you break down the word history, it's his story. And see, the story of the Raiders and the greatness of that organization, the players we had, the coaches we had, the success we had, and see, these younger generations grew up in a whole different industry, but technologically, they're advanced, all that kind of stuff. They grew up on cell phones. They grew up playing video games. But, to wear that uniform, you got to understand what it was, how it got there, and the greatness of what was achieved and accomplished.
Last question today, Coach, is what is your fondest memory of Al Davis?
You know, there's there's so many of them, but I tell you, one time we're playing it the last game of the season. I think it's like the '93 season. If we win, we're in the playoffs. If we're not, you're home. Okay, we're playing at the Coliseum. We're playing the Broncos. God, I used to love to play those guys. We play on a parking lot at Kmart. My God, just let's go. And I think at one time we had like 13 out of 14 wins. I was a streak unbelievable, you know. And but anyway, we're down. We're getting our butt kicked. We're stumbling, fumbling, flopping all over the place, and it's halftime, and we're still getting the bejeebers beat out of us. And I'm going into the locker room, going, "Oh my God, one play at a time. Let's just back it up. Let's step back." So then, the first series of the second half, Denver comes out, kicks the field goal. They go up by more points, and so from that point on, we actually are working the ball back and forth, up and down the field. We're catching up. We're catching up. It comes down to it's fourth down, I believe. We got the ball on like the 6-yard line. Last play of the game. And there's like 98,000 people in the place. They're screaming. We're down there. We got a chance to tie the game. And we were down like 17, 20 points in the third and fourth quarter. And so anyway, Jeff Hostetler's the quarterback. We got a pass combo set up for Timmy Brown and slot on the left side. We got Alexander Ace Wright from Auburn split out on the right side. Haas drops back, looks left, it's not there, looks again, then bam, flips his vision to the right, throws this ball that's probably rim high in the NBA, and Alexander Ace Wright's over there in the right, in the end zone in the right corner, leaps up, snags the ball, pulls it down. We kick the extra point, tie the game. It's like insanity. It's like then Denver gets the ball in overtime to start. And back then, you score, it's over. There was no reciprocal exchange of football. They punt. I said, okay, hey, we got to go down. We're going to score. We go down, kick the field goal, win the game, 33-30. Denver has to come back and play us the next week. So we're in the locker room after the ball game. Al's walking towards me, and he's on my left side. He reaches out, grabs me with his left hand, my left hand. He says, you know, and this is God's honest truth, and it shocked me. He says, you know, he said, I want to thank you for never quitting. He said, at halftime, he said, I thought we were going to lose. He says, I did not think we would be able to come back. And he says, I am so glad and so appreciative of the fact that you did not quit. You kept calling plays, you kept plugging away, and I said, well, you know, that's what we're here for. I said, now next week, they got to come back here. I said, we're going to make sure it ain't that close. And so the next week, they come back for the wild card game. The first 6 series of the game between us and Denver was punt, 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 punt. Then there's 6 touchdowns. This is still the first half. So then it's 21-all at halftime. So we had 6 punts and then 6 touchdowns in the first half, in that order. And we were throwing bombs and jet and Timmy Brown running wild and all that. It's 21-all at halftime. I said, okay, let's go in at halftime. We're going to get this thing squared away. Defense will worry about defense. We're going to come up with a way to close this deal out. The second half, we come out, we scored 21 points. They got Zippo. We beat them 42-21. And so it took a second half to be able to, you know, but no, but for Al to make that statement that he did to me in the locker room after we ended up winning the ball game in overtime, you know, I really took that, to me, was like the ultimate, you know, high five. I thank God you did not quit. He says, and he said, and it was the first time I ever heard him say that he felt like, you know, he conceded. He says, I didn't think we'd have a chance to come back. We couldn't stop him and we weren't doing well. And I says, but you know, you just kept plugging away. And that's what you got to do when you're a play caller. You just got to keep plugging away until you get a feel, till you get guys start to click. You got to build the momentum and allow them to respond and put the ball in their hands and let them make plays. And but that one of, and then we used to get into discussions all the time, and he'd kid me about being. I tell him I have convictions, and he says, "Yeah, your convictions. You're stubborn. You're Irish." He says, "Convictions to you, stubborn to me." You know, but so we could jump back and forth and make comments like that, and I love working with the guy. I mean, there's places, you know, why would I want to leave that organization and go elsewhere? I mean, all the other freedoms I had, which he allowed, video games, software products, he just said, hey, just go do what you want to do, okay? Just keep drawing up touchdowns, And
Love it. Absolutely love it.
He was that way. That's how.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much for taking the fans kind of behind the scenes and really laying out the groundwork of Al and who he was. Please stay on the line. I want to talk to you. Don't forget, that's the great Coach Tom Walsh. You can follow us. Follow me when you go to Hondo SR on IG, at Hondo Carpenter on Twitter, and always catch out all of our written articles when you go to si.com/NFL/Raiders. We'll see you tomorrow.